Notice in today's gospel reading that our Lord is not accepted by the people of his hometown, and our Lord points out that a prophet, they are without honor except in their own country and in their own house. In other words, they don't accept the prophet, people of one's hometown. Why is this? Could be many reasons, but part of it is they know the person, and it's kind of like, how dare he preach to us? And where did he get this wisdom? This is what they question. And these deeds of power, right? They don't trust that it's really from God. It's kind of like they're more likely to assume that he's lost his mind than to actually accept the fact that he is a prophet of God or God incarnate, because he's doing all these great signs. So when we get used to people and how they are, and all of a sudden we don't see them for a while and then they're transformed, it's kind of like we wonder, what happened here, right? And if the person is transformed in a good way, the idea is that we look into it, and maybe we need to do what they did. Maybe we need to change ourselves too. But very often we end up rejecting that person because they're just so strange and we're not used to their new way of being. But there is this saying, as our Lord points out, that prophets are not accepted by their own people. And this is the reality when it comes to, for example, us proclaiming the faith to our family members. They don't want to listen. They know what we may have been like in the past, and it's kind of like, who do you think you are telling me? But we still need to proclaim. We should proclaim. And this unexpected prophet, right? So when we become a prophet, it's like people don't expect that, but it's actually good. And today is the feast of St. Ignatius of Loyola. And he is definitely an unexpected prophet. Like nobody would have ever thought that he would become a holy man, a great saint, or a prophet of God. And as you know, he was the founder of the Jesuits. So he was born, I think, in 1491, died in 1556. And initially, he was in the military. He was very chivalrous. He had some ideals, like he wanted to serve I think it was the Queen of Spain, and he kind of fell in love with her and just, imagined himself serving her and, winning honors for her. And he was extremely brave and very determined. So there was an account where he was defending a fort or a castle, and the enemy, they just couldn't believe how long they were resisting. But it was all because of St. Ignatius, because he was just determined to persevere in fighting against the enemy, and he kept the morale of the other men going. But as we know, he was injured by a cannonball which shattered his bone in his lower leg. And once he was down, all the other soldiers, they surrendered. And the enemy admired St. Ignatius for his heroism, so much so that they preserved his life and took him to convalesce. And, he eventually, I think he went to his sister's home or something like that, but he was convalescing for a very long time. He, when his bone healed, he didn't like the way it looked, so he asked them to break it again, which was very dangerous. He could have died, no anesthesia. So he's manifesting tremendous wisdom. But what's interesting about St. Ignatius is how his conversion came about. So he's convalescing, he's in bed, he's got nothing to do. He's just got his memory, his imagination, and sometimes he would, try to remember the old days or just imagine himself, being a great servant of the Queen of Spain or whatever it was. But then he asked for something to read, and the only books that were available was the Life of Christ and a Life of Saints. So he started reading these, and he took an interest. And then he started imagining, well, what if I were to become like one of these saints? What if I became a follower of Christ? And it appealed to him. But he would go back and forth. Sometimes he would imagine himself as a saint. Sometimes he would have imagined himself leading a life of chivalry and just the previous things that he had done. He had not been a very good individual. He would kill people and stuff like that. So he would go back and forth, and at one point he noticed there was a difference, because he took delight in both imaginings, in both trying to imagine himself as a saint and as a chivalrous soldier. But the thing that he noticed was that when he imagined himself doing great worldly things, he took intense delight and pleasure in it. But then afterwards, the pleasure would dissipate very quickly, and he would feel like really down. On the other hand, when he imagined himself being like a saint and serving God and serving the Queen of Heaven as opposed to the Queen of Spain, he took delight in that too. It wasn't as intense, but he noticed that afterwards those good feelings persisted for a longer period of time. And so he realized that this is what he needs to do. And this is how he developed his spiritual discernment of how to make decisions, right? So just because you take delight in something doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And it's very typical nowadays that especially a lot of young people, they just pursue those things that are delightful or entertaining, like doom scrolling, instead of doing their homework, for example. So doing one's homework is kind of boring, it's kind of difficult, it's laborious, it requires a lot of effort, exertion. We don't like that. We prefer to be lazy, we prefer to be entertained, we prefer not to be doing anything. But in the long run, the young student who just spends his or her time just, seeking entertainment and pleasure and just enjoying themselves, they don't get good marks, they don't get a good job, they're going to be struggling the remainder of their life. On the other hand, the student who takes the time to do their homework, sure, they might spend some time on social media, but they make the effort to do their homework. It feels good to get your homework done. It feels good to figure out a difficult problem and to conquer it and to master it, to learn something new. And these kind of students, they're the ones who are going to get better marks. They're also going to have better self-discipline, and because they get better marks and have greater self-discipline, greater self-confidence, they're going to get better jobs. They're going to be set for life. They're going to be able to enjoy like going to the cottage or buying a boat or all kinds of recreational things or travel, because they're going to be well off for the remainder of their lives. They're going to be much happier than that other student who just seeks pleasure and entertainment. So this is one of the things that we can take away from the conversion experience of Saint Ignatius of Loyola. And yes, it was not expected that he, of all people, would have become a great saint. The potential is that you and I have that same ability, but we too must discipline ourselves. We too must strive to be like the saints and to grow in goodness, in holiness, and to spend our time wisely, not foolishly.